being on guard all the time. Look for those types of symptoms, and it may be that you do have PTSD, and there's help for that.
What would you say to somebody who is struggling with whether or not they actually have it?
All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Counter Calls. Today we have Byron Prescott. Thanks for being with us. He is a dear friend, awesome, godly man. He's a commercial real estate attorney and a counselor whose focus is PTSD. Byron, thank you so much.
I'm happy to be here.
Cool,
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Those are two career paths that I feel like don't often overlap. How did this work?
And you would be surprised, but they actually do from time to time.
Really? Do they?
In my negotiating skills for the law job, I found that I can use some of those skills in my counseling job, especially with couples when I'm working.
That's
with
really cool.
It's not that big a stretch. If you ask any lawyer that has also got an LPC, a licensed professional counselor license, you'll hear them say it's not that big a jump.
That's really cool. I wouldn't have ever guessed that, but I mean, I guess when you start like talking about it,
is it because you think lawyers are heartless?
Yeah, they're just boring. No, I'm just playing. No. Respect, only respect. Do you typically work a lot with couples? Is that the?
No, I don't. Okay, I don't. I probably only about maybe 5% of my practice is couples, and usually one of those couples suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah.
So you and I were able to have lunch last week. And I learned a lot about PTSD. And I think that a lot of people may suffer from this and not even know.
They do. A lot of times I'm the first person to do the assessment for PTSD on them. It's called the PCL, and it's a 20-question assessment. And many, many times I'm the very first person to tell them, hey, you're scoring into the PTSD range on this. And a lot of people are, I don't want to say surprised, because by the time they get to me, they're looking for help and they don't understand what they don't understand. And at that point, a lot of people are like, okay, this makes sense. So many times when I deliver that news, they're actually relieved. There's a reason why they're behaving the way
they can finally figure out what comes next now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, Byron, what do you think be some of these little triggers that people have that would indicate that they may have PTSD? Like,
a lot of what I see is people who are overwhelmed by sounds, smells, light. Sometimes people have triggers that are associated with crowds. If one grew up in a household where the parents were always arguing and neglectful, then people arguing say at the airport is going to cause them to all of a sudden become overwhelmed and not be able to process that. It really jerks them back into those times when they were using those coping mechanisms as a kid.
Yeah, because that's very interesting, because when you think PTSD, you think war veteran.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
You think first responder.
Yep.
Somebody who has gone through an extreme.
Somebody who's seen some really dark stuff, right?
You don't think of the individual who had a verbally aggressive dad.
Right.
Or a dysfunctional mom and dad.
Or
don't
the
think
rape,
like this.
Or the rape victim, or the person who was locked in a room for a long period of time, or, someone who was jumped or mugged or whatever. You don't really think about that, but it can be the everyday person who had stuff thrown at them at their house when they were a little kid. You never know. So
let me ask you this real quick. So in terms of like defining trauma, is this on a spectrum per se, or do you find that there is some type of, I don't want to say violent, but aggressive act that sort of triggered them from a young age that has led to this? Or is it like the type of deal where it's like maybe a kid was just born with a sensitivity to bright lights or sound or this or that? Is there truly like a distinction between the two? Trauma can occur in different ways, obviously. You can have your big T traumas. That's what we call them, where it's I've been shot at or stabbed or mugged or in a horrible car accident or something like that. And it's usually a one-time event or an event that can last, several hours. But the little T traumas,
we see a lot of that too. That's neglect over time, either inside of a marriage or as a child, or maybe someone was held captive at some point during war or something like that. Those little T traumas can add up to be a big, PTSD thing.
So when you have somebody who they may hear that they have PTSD, but you're like, I didn't experience going to war. There's other people out there that have bigger problems than I do.
Right.
For example, there was these little things that would keep happening throughout your childhood and your life. It's almost like, would you say like just the water torture? It could be just as bad over time, because it's just like a lot of these little, and you have it, but you're like in the big picture, you're like, well, this person has a terminal illness, or this person has lost a best friend in battle, and right there, or this person was raped. But
you
it was
feel bad about even talking about it, right? Like it's like, should I go to a therapist because my parents fought like growing up, right? Like you almost like feel like, well, that's stupid. Like so and so went to war and saw all of his friends die, and it almost diminishing it maybe in a sense makes it over time just as bad. And then they end up with a guy like you and they're like, okay, now I understand this. Now I can see this, right?
Right. And Evan, I think that's a really good point. Really, both of you. Let's go back and look at biology, for example. If you break your arm and you run to the hospital, they set it, they put it in whatever they need to do to contain it. The next day on your usual workout period, are you going to do push-ups on that arm?
No, of course not.
No. You're going to wait and let you know, you're going to tend to it. Mm-hmm. So God has this natural way of healing our bodies. And I really feel like he also has a natural way of healing our minds too, when there's some kind of mental health issue. So if you don't tend to the broken arm, it's going to either re-break or the fracture's just going to constantly cause issues. I'm not a doctor, so I don't really know how that works, but I know it can hurt. Dismissing it, like you were saying, well, I had neglect growing up. I was a latchkey kid. I came home to an empty house, or to a house where the family was yelling or screaming.
Yeah.
That isn't as bad as my friend down the street whose dad shot and killed everybody in the house. Right. So mine isn't that big a deal. Well, there's still the pain.
Yeah.
The pain didn't go away.
It still manifests. We have
to tend to that. Yeah. Especially if there's any evidence of PTSD, we need to tend to that pain.
And it's probably like the type of deal where it goes on long enough unaddressed that it does just get worse and worse and worse. And I don't know maybe it doesn't manifest in the way that the kid whose dad shot himself does, but it certainly has an effect on you over time with that, I would imagine, right?
Right. And the research says that PTSD doesn't just get better. It can get worse. Oh, sure. But it's not going to get better on its own.
Sure.
It's just learning how to coping with PTSD isn't always going to fix the problem.
Yeah.
Counseling is where we can actually work on the reprocessing and the repair of those mental health issues.
Yeah.
And that's where the healing takes place. There were a couple of other things that I wanted to mention under that category of God using natural healing. So another thing that gets in the way, minimizing, diminishing gets in the way of healing. And I know I have to be careful with this one, but spiritualizing the pain can be a problem too.
Like how so?
Romans 8:28, I put it on my little sheet here. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that verse, and we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him. I've heard a lot of people on the couch say, well, I know that God allowed this to happen for my own goodness, for his glory, and for my, strengthening me. That's still not addressing the pain.
Yep, exactly. Oh, exactly.
Wow. And until we address that pain, it's not going to get better. And I really feel like God's provided some amazing therapies, several of them which I'm trained in, that allow for natural healing. And so going for the healing process, it's a beautiful thing. The last two things under that one was self-contempt, which is kind of buying into the trauma. Well, I was a bad kid, so I should have been beaten that way.
I deserved
that because I took that cookie.
Yeah.
it still hurt.
Yeah.
It still hurt.
Yeah.
And the last
and it
one,
goes unaddressed, like you said, you know?
the last one where I would, throw us all under the bus and maybe back up over it is hurry, overworked. It's easy to say, you know what? I got to focus on my work, on my family, and my life.
Oh man, you can take that to like, I got to focus on alcohol. I got to focus on whatever, in order to take the thought and the pain away.
Right.
And that's where it even gets trickier, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I mean, I haven't met a person with PTSD who doesn't self-medicate in some way. It's at a 100% rate.
And it doesn't have to necessarily be a substance. It could be...
Oh, it could be anything, right?
I've known people who I've had to sort of bring them back from working out 3 times a day to just
3
once.
times a day.
Yeah. People who pour themselves into their jobs, school, pour themselves into school. And of course, we have the folks who are drinking and smoking pot and other drugs to try to numb the pain.
Yeah.
And that in itself is evidence that we need to go to a counselor and get some healing if we're relying on those things.
I told you whenever we first started talking, I had an issue in life where it was very beneficial for me to talk to somebody about things going on. And I sought out a counselor, and it was life-changing. It was like one of the best decisions that I could have made. Yeah. And there's so much of it to where just the idea of audibly verbalizing what's going on in your heart and your head and getting that out, it just right away, I think you can figure things out almost in your head.
Yeah.
Not entirely. And of course, having somebody like you who's an actual pro who knows how to like navigate all of that helps. But I think just in general, if people can just be more, I mean, like we talked about earlier, it's like, that's why discipleship's as important as it is. That's why therapy is as important as it is, because it's this idea that it's like you were taking what you were going through and you were laying that at the feet of somebody who you actually trust, professional or not, but can walk you through that. Obviously PTSD gets a little trickier than that, but I think that the same notion kind of applies still, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I would ask you, Evan, wasn't it helpful for you to have somebody there to bear witness to what you went through when maybe nobody else was around?
Yeah.
Nobody could see what was happening to you, or they didn't understand what was going on inside your head.
Yeah.
You're pouring it out to somebody. You all of a sudden have someone who can say, I get it.
Right.
I hear you.
Absolutely. It's so important because, again, so many people may suffer from this and not even know it. Just when our lunch conversation that we had the other day, again, I learned a lot about myself, and I felt so relieved because I do have little triggers that I'll get irritable, or my fight or flight is fight. Like you gave an example. You're like, well, if you're at Home Depot and you're pushing a buggy and somebody accidentally hits your buggy or bumps into you, and your first initial reaction is to get angry. Like, this could be a sign of a trigger of PTSD. Mm-hmm. And brother, that's me. I mean, I do a lot of apologizing to God and I go through, and I would go through life thinking, man, I'm just an a-hole. Like something's wrong with me. I'm just a mean person. And I fight it every day. I don't want to be that.
Right.
I was, literally praying in the car one time, and a dude came into my lane, and I cussed like mid prayer. I'm like, sorry, God, I'm sorry. Oops, sorry, Father, but
let me start over.
I think God knows all the big words.
Yeah.
But agreed. I can't explain. I went home that night and I told my wife, I feel relieved. I feel like there's a path that I could take to help me with this.
There is.
And that's why I'm excited for this show, and I'm excited for you to talk about the different therapies that you offer, because it's awesome. And I can't wait for the viewers to learn more about this.
Yeah.
Well, could we address that fight, flight, or freeze?
Yeah, man, please.
Because I think in my mind, first of all, to add to the conversation that you were talking about where you personally got some counseling.
Yeah.
Isn't God expecting us to seek godly counsel anyway?
Yeah.
Wow.
And, if you have a toothache, aren't you going to go to a dentist?
Yeah.
You're not going to go out to the garage and get your pliers out.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
I think
if you need new contacts, you're not going to try to make them up yourself.
Yeah.
I think there's an element there where it's like, I think a lot of the time Christians kind of just expect like, God, please make this happen. Please make this happen. And they don't necessarily, and I'm speaking honestly straight to myself with this, but they don't necessarily look at, okay, what can I do to make this happen? What can I do to fix this issue? Yes. Do we need God? 110%. But can we also do some heavy lifting ourselves, pick things up and move things on us?
Right.
I do think that there's, I don't want to necessarily call it a laziness aspect, but I do think that there's this thought process that's like, hey, God's got this. I'm just going to wait for his timing. I'm going to wait for him to pick me up and lift me out of this. And that's not to say that God can't or won't, because, you know, he can.
Right.
But I think like you had mentioned with the Bible verse, there's an element where it relies on us as well too.
Of course.
You know, and
he
that's
expects us to seek godly counsel.
Exactly.
And that's what I want to provide in my, whether I'm working with someone who is a believer or not, I want to be able to provide what he's equipping me to provide. There are moments when I'm sitting in the counseling room and something incredibly brilliant comes out of my mouth, and I'm like, where did that come from?
Thank you, Holy Spirit.
And so I know he's present, and that's why I do this. It's such an honor. It is such an honor to get down and get my hands dirty with people in their most intimate parts of their lives, because if I don't do it with them, I don't know who will. You know,
is there simple things for people watching at home to maybe, you know, do a test or have a self-reflection moment where they can say, okay, yes, I think I actually do have some semblance of PTSD. Like, are there certain, how does it work?
There are certain behaviors, certain questions that I ask when somebody first sits down on my couch, that will help me start to evaluate whether or not they may have it.
Okay.
Some of these behaviors are like, you know, mostly physical responses. So Mark, you pushing the buggy through the Home Depot, somebody accidentally bangs the buggy, it touches your stomach, it doesn't hurt or anything, but all of a sudden there's a physical response. People's heart pounding, heavy breathing, chest feeling tight, stomach issues. That's a question I ask, okay, how do you respond physically to your environment? If somebody says, oh gosh, I lose my mind, I can't think for some reason, I feel like I need to run away or stand my ground and fight. What happens there is the rational side of the brain goes completely offline. And then they're functioning as though they're being chased by a tiger or a bear or something like that. Those are some of the biggest issues. Being on guard, being vigilant. You know, just there's always people, you'll see them where they walk into a restaurant and they want that chair that's at the back to the wall so they can see the entire restaurant.
Yep.
That's something I'm looking for. What else did I have on my list? Self-blame. So you just mentioned that one. Oh, I'm sorry. That was my fault. You know, there's a car accident 3 miles away. Oh gosh, that was my fault because I just drove through that intersection. I mean, it gets to the point where the self-blame can become nonsensical.
And you're apologizing for things that you didn't even have anything to do with.
Yeah, I've got my living room all set up and somebody walks in and bumps their leg on the couch and it hurts. And you're saying, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I should have never put the couch there. Why did I put the couch? What I'm saying is I
feel like I do
an overreaction. A normal reaction is, oh, I'm so sorry.
Right.
Or the guy at Home Depot who says, I'm sorry. And you just go, okay, it's okay. I'm fine. That's the regular response. The overreaction is, oh my God, I got to get out to my car. I got to get out of here and leave my buggy.
I remember one time I apologized to somebody because the weather was bad. And like, I caught myself like immediately afterwards. And I was like, what? I was like, what did I just say?
Is there something I don't know?
Probably a lot. Yeah.
Are you really that in charge?
Let's be real. Yeah. I'm actually God. I'm glad you picked up on it.
Is there any evidence of 90% of the entire world, especially I guess the US maybe, is caffeinated on a daily basis. Caffeine, no doubt, triggers this fight or flight response on a small level. Most of our soldiers are caffeinated to the max. Some of them are on amphetamines.
Aren't sleeping as much.
The experience that triggers this PTSD when you're caffeinated, and then people drink caffeine every day. Is there any research, do you think, that suggests maybe laying off the caffeine before the experience happens or even after it happens can help the symptoms subside? Because, I mean, this is the same thing as what we deal with doctors, where we're treating the symptoms because we have no idea what the cause is. And instead, we need to go back and look at the root cause to prevent it from happening in future generations.
Yeah, I would, I mean, specifically with caffeine, since I have a mild caffeine addiction, I don't want to throw it under the bus.
90% of America consume it every day.
I can say with certainty and from personal experience, caffeine enhances some of the trigger responses.
It would have
most
to,
certainly.
right?
Yeah.
And could it be the cause too? Like you're caffeinated
the cause
when this event happens that caused your PTSD.
The cause of like that like reaction you're saying.
Yeah, like,
not the cause of like the actual.
No, I'm saying like you were diagnosed with PTSD, say on Monday at 12 o'clock. Mm-hmm. Were you caffeinated when that event happened?
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Right?
Was it heightening the experience that you had?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe, because, you go back to the samurai, they only drank green tea and matcha because of the theanine in it, because coffee made them jittery, right? The theanine in green tea balances out that stress. And so I wonder, I mean, we're drinking monsters day in and day out. And so I wonder if the rise in PTSD is correlated with the amount of caffeine we're ingesting.
It's probably whatever that like trigger
It could be an enhancement.
If it's like a rape or anything, I mean, like, of course, that's like a legit thing.
Yes,
but if it's like, oh man, I bumped my foot, I'm going to, kill that guy kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. Different story.
All I can say is from my experience, everybody is like a fingerprint and everybody's going to respond differently. Mm-hmm. So Evan, you and your wife could be standing in your front yard and the neighbors across the street are out, their dog's out, and you love their dog, and it comes trotting across the street and bam, it gets hit by a car. You could be doubled over in tears and just overwhelmed, and your wife could go get a shovel and just say, okay, well, that dog's done.
That would literally happen.
I don't know your wife. Hopefully
she's
not.
Definitely the tough one. I'll say that.
But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
People respond differently to different events.
For me personally, as I learn about this, my triggers are my triggers. Doesn't matter how many cups of coffee or caffeine I've had. I mean, it could be first thing when I woke up or last thing
But then you're going through withdrawal if you hadn't had coffee yet. So I think what I'm trying to say is we don't know the effects of what it would be like without caffeine, because we're either caffeinated or we're going through withdrawal. And
I would say it could definitely enhance the idea that it could cause PTSD. I don't know about that.
Not that it could outright unlikely. Cause, but could it weight it more is what I'm saying. Oh,
sure. I'm sure. Yeah.
The cause of it.
Yeah.
Another thing, and I think it's a characteristic that encourages me to give the PTSD assessment to somebody, is when I say, okay, once you're triggered, how long does it take you to regulate or calm down? So in the incident at Home Depot, let's say, for example, the bump was more than just a gentle nudge, but it actually, you felt it. Not a big one, but you went ahead and when you continued shopping, you got what you needed, and you were just ready to get out of there. You go out to your car, and then you get home and you're still feeling the same way. And then an hour later, you're still feeling the same way. That's what concerns me. That is a very good sign that somebody has PTSD, because they can't self-regulate in a short period of time.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And so what we try to do with our therapies is reduce that amount of time. A lot of times people will say, it takes me days to calm down.
Wow.
I can't stop overthinking this. My brain won't stop because it's trying to make sense of an incident. The bump in the stomach may have been similar to an actual punch in the gut 5 years ago during an attack. And that little bump, you get the same response as you did back when you were actually attacked and hit in the stomach.
Interesting.
Would you think that like ruminating and overthinking and not being able to let situations go, and creating scenarios is a form of.
That's this period of time. That's what's happening during this period of time.
I go through that a lot.
I'll have a wife say, out of the blue, my husband will just go silent, and he goes back to our room, and he sits there for 2 or 3 hours, and ultimately he's fine. So my response to that is, get him in here. We'll give him an assessment and just let him know. If he wants therapy, we can continue that too. A lot of people avoid therapy because they don't want to talk about it. There's a fear of reliving the incident, and that's the biggest fear. I think that's what keeps people from coming into
I think you're right.
into my shop.
Yeah. And so by not speaking of it, one may think, I'm just going to suppress it and it's going to eventually get better. Or if I don't bring it up, it's going to be okay. But that's in fact the opposite.
It's like when you tell Brittany, hey, calm down.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah. Just calm down. Just calm down.
I wonder if that works for anybody.
Just calm down over
Yeah.
Just chill.
Yeah, just chill, girl. So once you've met somebody and assessed them and determined, yes, I think you have PTSD in some sense of it. At that point, what does treatment look like?
We start by doing what is called cognitive behavioral therapy, or using some kind of reprocessing or some kind of resource to get an understanding of the actual incident and how they're responding to it. I have to have some idea where we're going to go. The other thing is, what we want to do is we want to try to go back as far as we possibly can and get the earliest trauma we can. And that will help the person understand how the therapy is going to go for the other traumas. And the therapy isn't different for each trauma that a person has, because people have multiples. It's just separate. So the brain is working in separate areas. So for example, what do I tell them? I try to get the conversation going. It's better when I do the main therapy for trauma if we have developed some level of trust. They need to be able to say whatever they need to say to me. I can't, on the first 2 sessions, really expect someone to open up entirely, especially when it comes to sexual trauma. People just aren't real eager to talk about that. In fact, a lot of people were told not to talk about it.
Right.
And they were threatened not to talk about it. And so that's where we just kind of get an understanding of each other. We develop trust. I feel like I'm really good at that because people start trusting me and they start telling me really early on. And so there is a skill in managing trust levels with mental health clients because they've been hurt so bad and they don't want to have to relive something or hurt even more. I do explain the therapy. The primary therapy that I do is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, or EMDR.
Ooh.
It's very, it's.
That's what this thing is, right?
That's what this thing is.
Okay, yeah. I'm excited about this.
It's the number one form of therapy around the world for trauma, PTSD. And I'm even using it in my practice for addiction. I did not want to be a substance abuse counselor when I first started, but working with people with PTSD, everyone self-medicates. So I didn't have a choice. And I'm finding that I'm having very good success rate with people who have substance abuse and using EMDR in helping with that.
So how does this work? What does it do?
So I have to kind of go back and tell you the story behind it. Dr. Francine Shapiro was a psychologist, and she lived in New York. And I don't know that she had any particular trauma, but she did have some bad memories. And she noticed that when she was walking through the woods or through a park or something like that, that the memories that were so difficult for her weren't as difficult when her legs were moving. And so she thought, well, it must be something to do with the rhythm, because these memories are actually not intrusive anymore when I'm walking, but when I'm sitting, they are. And so she started doing this eye movement motion when she was working with trauma patients. And they noticed that they could make their way through the traumatic story without feeling the bodily responses. So
with their eyes going back and forth,
their
essentially?
eyes going back and forth.
Interesting.
So if you've been shot at or hit, either one, or had some kind of attack on your body, you're going to have a natural response anytime anything reminds you of that. And so you hear your kid drop a pot or a pan in the kitchen, it's going to make you respond. Your body is going to respond as though it's happening all over again. Well, when these people were talking about their trauma while their eyes were moving, it did something to the brain and it allowed the central nervous system to relax. So they didn't have the physical response as strong, and their brains were able to reprocess the event and make sense out of it. And they stopped crunching on it in their heads.
Wow.
And so,
and the only difference was just the eyes going back and forth.
Just the eyes going back. So when your kid's asleep and you check on them in the night and you can see their eyes going back in their head, they're just processing what happened in the day. That rapid eye movement is a part of the processing of events that happen throughout the day. Well, we have a way of, reenacting that process through the central nervous system that allows people to be able to just kind of relax and tell their trauma story. And then the brain, the rational side of the brain, can fill in the blanks, and memories start to come back that they forgot. Fragments that they didn't remember get filled in. So
that is so cool.
When you're next to an explosion of some kind, your body takes over and you need to, fight or fly or freeze. You're not going to necessarily remember everything, but your body's recording all of it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Your brain has a chance with EMDR to fill in those gaps and finally file this stuff away in a meaningful way, and it doesn't bother you anymore. You can remember it. You can remember every part of it, and you can tell your story kind of like I am today. So
that is the coolest thing.
Awesome.
So you want to try it out?
Yeah, man, I do. I really, really do. I love this stuff so much.
Yeah. No, this is great. This is exciting.
This is an enhancement on the eye movement.
Okay.
So we found out over time that there are multiple ways to do it. There can be a light bar, a sound bar, or a sound thing going from ear to ear. Whatever creates that bilateral stimulation of the brain.
And so this is in the hands.
Do I just hold these?
Yeah. For guys, my population is mostly men between, say, 20 and 45 or 50.
Okay.
And they respond to these paddles that vibrate back and forth. So I'm gonna turn it on.
Okay.
And see how
feel it. Yep.
How not scary it is.
Yeah.
Do you feel any electric shock at all?
No, none.
Okay, you're not getting any.
Yeah.
That would be
not yet.
Yeah. Well, no, that.
They discontinued
first. They discontinued that therapy a long time ago.
Isn't it crazy that they would do that?
Give it to Mark and let him try it. So what I do is I try to get people in a very relaxed state. Maybe they are thinking of a safe place, a place they've been that's beautiful. It smells good. It feels good. They have no responsibility, for example. And we get them fully relaxed, and this really assists in that process.
So this essentially takes
I'm going to stop it.
The place of them doing the eyes back and forth?
Right. Yeah.
So is this essentially in the brain? Is it doing that for them? Is it mimicking the same type of?
Sort of. It's more affecting the central nervous system than it is the actual brain. It is bilateral stimulation of the brain. So this lobe and then this lobe and back and forth. It is a stimulation to the brain, but more than anything else, we're calming the body and allowing it to not have the strong reaction.
So when they're actually doing this, are they laying down or eyes shut? Are they talking about
the preference for me in my practice is that they close their eyes if they feel safe.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the cool thing about it is people feel very relaxed. I work at Rockwall Counseling and Wellness. Here in Rockwall, we have multiple sites, and it's a very comfortable, soft, very, very safe environment. And so people immediately start feeling calm. And we know we're going to hit the hard stuff. They know before they come in that they're going to hit the hard stuff because we plan it out. And we choose which one we're going to do next and that sort of thing. And people do come in pretty nervous, pretty scared. But at a certain point, they get relaxed. We need that body to be fully relaxed so that the brain, the rational side of the brain, can manage those very difficult subjects. And it's amazing to see the healing take place right in front of my eyes.
That's amazing. So Byron, this calms the body, calms the brain so that you could start unpacking the memories that led to this traumatic experience. And then through continuous sessions, counseling sessions, you're starting to heal.
Right.
So is there anything that the patients do when they're not in the office?
Yes.
That
Good
keep
question.
them calm and to where they can not have these triggers, or at least cope with them and they're not as extreme?
Yes, absolutely. Again, we're talking about bodily responses. So the way I encourage people to respond or to work through triggers is to do something physical. Grab a kid, grab a dog, go for a walk. I'm huge on walking. I got everybody walking. Walking for 20 minutes is good. 30 is better. Shoot for 5 days a week. If you hit 3, we'll call it a victory. If you're really triggered, get down on the floor and do 15 push-ups. Can't do 15, do 15 squats. Cold water. This is all free therapy for people who are struggling. But the walks really are the best, I think, because it does that bilateral stimulation.
Dude, I love this stuff so much.
Dude, this is good stuff.
I love this
Dude,
stuff.
when we had our
So
lunch meeting the other day, bro, I learned so much about myself. And I went home and told Brittany, I was just like, dude, I was almost in tears. I was like, there's a reason why a lot of people, like you said, it's like Chinese water torture. You might not have
it is.
a 1 or 2 traumatic experiences, but it could be something to where it's, you could have it could be something you might not even know. You might have a overprotective mom.
Well, I think another thing too is we still have this mammalian brain from 25,000 years ago or whenever it was before we had all this technology. We have no idea what we're doing.
No.
With these screens, with society.
I know. And there's so much little knowledge even about the brain.
It's really interesting when you're on the front lines because I never know what to expect.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to come out of people's mouths.
Right.
I had a lady that we were doing EMDR. She was brutally gang raped and it went on for days. She was kidnapped and, basically escaped naked. Well, she did escape naked into the streets and people found her, picked her up and took her to the hospital. But we were doing EMDR and she had to stop for a second, which is fine. And she was like, my wrists are so tight. My wrists are absolutely so tight right now. And I don't even know. I don't even know what's going on here. We just take a break? And I was like, yeah. And I said, is there any chance that you were bound during this? And she said, yes. And she goes, that's what I'm feeling. And she broke down, of course. But that shows you that the central nervous system is recording everything, even when you're completely out, like totally unconscious.
She was thinking about her wrist, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Totally unconscious. She was completely unconscious, in and out for days. And, but she was bound when she woke up. Like she ran out and bound.
It's interesting. When I saw this gal who specializes in cranial sacral therapy, where they try to get the nerves working and whatnot. And I had that paralysis in my left arm after the ladder fall. She was trying to coach me and say something a little similar where she said, you need to relive the moments in your brain. But this time when you fall, you grab a hold of something and you didn't get hurt. Ooh, and so see if you can retrain the narrative. It's changing the narrative because she said your body is going to hold on to this pain. It's going to hold on to this trauma that you did, especially your left arm, until you tell it like it's okay, you're not going to do it again. And so if you can go back in time almost and tweak it, then you can start the healing process.
That right there shows you how powerful the brain is.
It is. It's like for anybody
you can like retrain it, in a sense. Like, man, you can do some crazy stuff.
Yeah. And the hard part is like it sounds woo-woo. And you're sitting here with a stranger and you have to be able to go there, I think it's very difficult.
The narrative therapy works really, really well. And it does with PTSD. It's not the main approach because we want the brain to fill in the gaps on its own. We don't want to create a narrative just for that trauma, but for everything around it, like relationship issues and work issues and those types of things, we can tell a new narrative, and it really does help people. It's amazing.
Yeah. So when I was doing my therapy, one of the most helpful things was being able to kind of talk about what was going on and then unpacking all these other things that I didn't even think about. And we were kind of able to like I had this quote unquote traumatic thing. Like if I explain any of this, everybody would be like, that's not traumatic at all, bro. But like we talked about earlier, to me, it was very, very, very traumatic. And I know. And like, that's the thing. For years, I was like, I didn't even think about it because I thought the fact that I would even call that traumatic is such a load of crap, right? But we were able to pinpoint a lot of the stuff that I was having happen at that time was from this like one event that I really, at the time when I was like 10, I just internalized all of this stuff. And again, like if I told anybody here, they'd be like, that doesn't sound bad at all, man. But to me, it was like a really, really big thing.
Right. And in those situations when you're 10 and you don't have the tools to manage those types of circumstances, and somebody says, you're not handling this well, or you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, sorry.
Are you okay?
No, I'm great. I've never been talking about hard.
Are you being triggered?
Yeah, I was going to say, hang on, talk to me again.
Sorry. The thing that happens is a kid will instantly start saying, I'm bad. And then it grows into, I've got to make straight A's or I'm bad. Right. I've got to make sure I pick up my room or I'm bad.
Right.
And people don't understand that those types of things need to be addressed because they end up becoming pleasers if they don't resolve that. And, you know, a male pleaser isn't that attractive to a woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Well, and
everybody knows that from high school, man.
Yeah,
the assholes get all the girls.
It's very true. But I do think that there's like a big thing about that where it's like how much it can affect your entire personality.
Right.
Just like that little tiny thing can affect how you treat people the rest of your entire life.
Right.
It's like, it just shows you how big this stuff is, you know, particularly big if it's not addressed.
Yeah.
It's wild.
The things that impact the brain are just amazing. And that's why I say it's an honor to get to do this job.
Yeah, no doubt.
People are coming to me with things that they have pigeonholed as not that big a deal, not understanding it, but still struggling with it. And we need to unpack it. Yeah. That's why I ask people, I put it on this list. I try to get people to do a timeline of their life and stop and celebrate those victories and stop and sit with those failures or those moments in time when they were really hurt.
Yeah.
Just sit with it.
And when it's not addressed, it can unfortunately rob the joys of things like relationships.
Yes.
So let's talk about that and your experiences and what you've seen.
My personal experience. One thing I didn't say is I come to this as a human being who struggled with PTSD for 40 plus years. And so I have a unique perspective on how this works with people. And I think that God allowed these traumas to occur so that I could end up serving in his kingdom.
That's a beautiful thing.
It is an honor. But at the same time, it took its toll on certain relationships and work and, you know, any number of things. I have the most amazing wife, and she figured out how to calm me, and I'm so thankful for her. But a person who's been triggered and is feeling overwhelmed doesn't want to answer questions like, what's going on?
Yeah.
What happened? What are you feeling? Because you don't know. That's the problem with being triggered when you have PTSD is you don't really know how to
and then
formulate.
That flusters you even more.
And it makes it worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have people say, well, and I had some stats, I think 70% of people with PTSD have divorce in their, in their story.
I'll bet.
In their life story. And people who have PTSD are 13% more likely to commit suicide.
13 times.
13 times more, yeah.
Yeah, you have it right here in your notes.
Yeah.
Divorce rates are, with PTSD, around 70%.
Yeah.
And yes.
And it's 13 times more likely to end in suicide.
And that's 70% of those folks that have PTSD end up in a divorce. And Byron, I wonder what the stats are for individuals that have PTSD and don't even know.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
right? Those numbers can't be accurate because one of the things about PTSD is people feel like they can't reveal it. They can't address it. They can't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so many, many people are walking around with this issue.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, these like stats are only stats because these are people who've said, hey, I have this.
Right.
But talk about the millions of others who haven't even considered that. You had mentioned earlier with the woman who invented this, you had said something interesting. You said you weren't sure if she actually had a trauma, but you said she had certain unpleasant memories that led her to develop this. Is there a difference in unpleasant memories and going through things that don't necessarily manifest as a trauma?
Yes. Yeah,
what is
absolutely.
that? What's the deciding factor there?
Evan wants to know where he falls on
yeah. Right. Tell me a little bit more.
Is this trauma or is this less?
It's not so much about the fact or the facts involved. It's more about how the person responds to those facts.
So it's a response thing.
Yeah, it is absolutely a response thing. If something is recorded in your body as a trauma, in your mind as a trauma, then the chances of it manifesting into PTSD are much greater than just, grandma died in a car accident.
Right.
We're all going to the funeral. That's a part of life. What really happens in trauma is a big T trauma, a very much unexpected event caught somebody off guard.
Yeah.
And caused a big response. So we weren't designed to have trauma. If you go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, it was perfect. It smelled good. It was pretty. It was calm. They were with God. Why would God create a brain that can handle trauma in that environment? Then everything went sideways and our brains weren't prepared for it.
Sure.
And so that's where people respond differently because we weren't really designed to handle trauma. Now, yes, you see those folks that can go through a very traumatic thing and not have it affect them. They cope well. But the vast majority of people really need some care after a big event like that.
Yeah, I feel like if you were going to cope well, it's going to take work on your end. You have to seek out people like you or friends who you trust and everything to actually help you along with the coping, depending on the trauma, of course. But I do think that you have to be very intentional about it,
And you don't really know. I mean, I've heard different studies, but you don't really know if somebody's going to develop PTSD until maybe 6 months after the big T trauma.
Yeah.
When it comes to those ongoing traumatic experiences that people experience as children, for example, or if they're in a really violent marriage and it goes on for a long time, or they're just belittled for a long time, we really can't tell until they're about 6 months away from that issue.
Gotcha. Interesting.
It's kind of hard to test somebody while they're in it. So those folks that were in that plane crash in Toronto last week, I guess, where the plane flipped upside down.
Yeah.
They probably are okay emotionally right now, or they're stabilizing right now and regulating. But I would be interested in knowing what number of those people developed PTSD 6 months later.
And another thing to build off of what you said, I think it's really difficult for humans to talk about their feelings in general. And the reason I say that is because when we were in church last week, the Pastor Josh said something about, hold on to your wife and what you're thankful for her for. And I was like, why is this so difficult? This person's everything to me, but the embarrassment of people, everybody's doing the same thing. Yeah. So it doesn't make sense logically when you think about it after the fact. Yeah. You're like, why am I scared to say this out loud? So I mustered something like, you're amazing. And I'm so thankful for you. And then it got to her and she was like, there was a point where she was incapable. She's like, what I said in my head was amazing. And I'm like, I believe it.
Yeah, totally.
And you don't have to say anything.
I
right?
liked it. Thanks.
But why is it so difficult to say these things that may or may not be embarrassing, but really mean something to the person that's really close to us in our life, the closest,
it's
right?
It's a layer of vulnerability. And I think that it probably the core, that's a big factor in whether or not a thing becomes traumatic or not, right?
Anti-mammalian, right? It's
it is. It is. Yeah, it's like, I shouldn't have to talk about feelings or, any of that nonsense.
Until the symptoms are uncontrollable, a lot of people don't come see me.
Yeah.
You know, they just think I have an angry husband or I get angry easily.
Yeah, right. I'm just wired that way.
Yeah, I'm just wired that way. Or that was modeled for me.
That's a lazy answer. It's like, well, you can change.
Or I just, for some reason, I withdraw for 3 hours.
Yeah.
When my wife pisses me off or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, you know, I just need, you know, to take a bong hit and I'm okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing is usually what triggers people to come in to see me because, okay, a couple of times I understand, but when it goes on for years and years and everything makes you angry, then that is an issue.
Is there a, I don't know if this is a good or bad idea, but is there a way for people to self-diagnose with this? Like, is there a way for anybody to say, yeah, I think I've got PTSD, or I'm pretty certain, or maybe not? I don't know. Is that
the PCL assessment that I use is online?
It is. Okay.
Anybody can grab it and score it themselves.
How do you get to it?
Instructions.
You just look it up online, basically.
Yeah, I'd have to send it to you guys.
Okay. So it's ptsd.va.gov.
I think that this is awesome.
Yeah.
I think
We'll link the
PCL5
PDF
is
in the
what I use.
description.
Yeah. I encourage everybody to take this test and then go see somebody.
Yeah.
Go see a licensed therapist and counselor because it could do wonders for yourself and your marriage and your business relationships and your friendships.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, before you're even married,
Right.
you know?
If you are around a person with PTSD long enough, you'll start to notice cycles in their lives, and they're short little cycles where, well, I have a couple of drinks before I go to bed. I kind of zone out. I don't talk to my wife that much. Then I don't sleep that well because the alcohol is being metabolized in the night. It turns into sugar, and all of a sudden you get a boost. So you don't get the deep sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Wake up the next day, you go to work. Everybody's irritating at work. That gets you home to where you grab a beer when you're walking, you know, from the garage into the house, and the cycle keeps going. When even people call me and say, my life is so boring and I can't break out of it. We look at those cycles to determine what it is that we can do to break the cycle. You know, how we can change their schedule in a way that's meaningful. That's another way that people can kind of have free therapy is look at their schedule throughout the day and adjust it some and build in some margin so they're not rushed all the time.
We talked about this with like the water guys, and like I remember us saying, yes, it can be expensive to put in filters in your house and drinking water and shower water and everything, but it's an investment in your own health. And I feel the exact same way about this. I mean, I don't think there's a better thing to invest in than your health, right?
Dude,
mental health is
you can buy a filter or be the filter.
Exactly. Yeah, that's great.
Wow.
There you go. New motto.
I think we're done.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is it's taboo for men to talk about their feelings.
It is.
And we've grown up in a society where it's like, you're a man, walk it off, put some dirt on it.
Shake it off.
And you don't talk about the family.
Right.
You don't talk about the family, you know? So you just have like this ideology of like, I'm tough. I don't have PTSD. I don't need to worry about it. It's cool. I don't need to talk to anybody. But the reality is you're constantly anxious. You're irritable.
Right.
You and your wife, you're clenched. Your relationships, whether in business or, you're in your marriage, suffer. So if you want good quality of life and good relationships and a healthy physical body, because as you say, Byron, and also the book that you brought up, The Body Keeps the Score, your body holds on to this trauma.
Right.
Release it. What's so bad about doing that and just getting better and bettering your quality of life?
Absolutely.
I'm all in on this because I don't want anything. The enemy tries to rob you of your joy already every day.
But it's easier with people with PTSD.
Yeah.
He can poke one little
100%.
One little button and that's it. I do want to address one thing with EMDR that is important for people who may not have the funds for long-term counseling. EMDR goes really fast. We can usually knock out one traumatic event in just 1 or 2 sessions.
Oh,
and
wow.
their body feels better.
When you say knockout, do you mean like
We do a full round of EMDR. So with this unit that we just tried a minute ago, I'll let that vibration run for about 15 or 20 seconds or so, while somebody is quietly letting their brain fill in the information. Then we stop. We talk about another piece of the trauma, and then we run this. And as we move through the actual traumatic event, their brain is in real time reprocessing the event. As long as they're calm and they're not really reliving it, they're just telling the facts about it and making it all make sense. Then their brain can resolve the issue. Once their brain resolves the issue, people, the very next day will call me, or I always check on people the next day, but they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I slept so well."
wow?
In a house where I always felt unsafe because somebody broke in and attacked us in our house, I was fine this morning when I got up, walked in there. I didn't have any triggers. Like, it happens immediately. And then the overtime results are, a few weeks later, people will start to realize, wow, I didn't have those thoughts this week. I wasn't tackled by that memory like I have been for every day for the last 17 years.
Wow.
And it's remarkable how fast it works, which means that the therapy ultimately becomes cheaper.
As a therapist, does it ever get difficult for you to live around these stories of just pure horror that you hear?
After going through it myself, I would say no. I feel like I'm the guy that's in a tunnel that they're in, and it's dark, but I'm the one with the torch, and I'm leading them out of that tunnel.
Wow.
Because PTSD can very much make your world very, very small. And what I'm doing is I'm leading them out. Another concept that you might think of about counselors is, how do you hear all this negative stuff all day long and not bring it home with you?
That's what I would, yeah.
The way that I do it is I imagine, this person is in a pit and I'm next to the pit, but there's a big oak tree next to me that I can hold on to and reach down and help pull them out. But if I get down there, we're both in it. I can't do it. So the goal is to be sturdy and strong. And for whatever reason, it doesn't affect me because I crave their healing. I want to see them finally step out of the tunnel or out of the pit.
Dude, you're awesome. That's super cool. Man.
Thanks.
That's so cool.
That's amazing,
It
brother.
is.
You
Really
it's
beautiful.
an honor and it's a calling. I feel like it's a duty that God has for me to do, and I'm happy to do it.
Do you ever implement any kind of dietary changes with anybody? Do you ever try to get anybody to just, do tiny things like drink more water, try to get better sleep, try to eat a little bit cleaner, just in order to kind of help like the mind a little bit?
Yeah. Water is a big deal for all of my folks, because our bodies have to kind of warm the water to room temperature in order to process it. I tell people, when you're feeling triggered, when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling the depression that comes with PTSD, go get some cold water and drink it as fast as you can, and let your body just be distracted by the process of making that, processing that water.
wow.
I had to get off of sugar a long time ago. Sugar is what cancer likes the best.
Yeah.
And so I've had cancer twice, and I ultimately had to just get as far away as I could. When I got off of it, I realized it does mess with your stomach. When your gut is upset, then your brain is upset.
Yeah,
And
100%.
so there is a connection, brain-gut connection, and there are studies that talk about that. I don't know much about it, but I do try to encourage people to kind of get away from sugar if you can.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible.
When you say sugar, what do you mean? Do you mean
the
sweet
worst-
high fructose corn syrup, or do bananas fall into that?
The worst is the highly processed white sugar, granulated sugar that's basically in everything in America. All of that stuff, depending on when you eat it, will wake you up in the night. We need to have good sleep. And so I'm kind of big on sleep for people. I have sleep tips that I could share.
Yes.
But take them.
I have sleep tips I can share. But the goal is to get people to good sleep patterns also, which means you've got to eat right in order to be able to sleep right, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, totally agree with you.
But yeah, I encourage people to be on a good diet. I need to be as well. Sometimes I'm the pot calling the kettle black.
But you also, Byron, right? You've cut gluten out.
Yeah.
You've cut gluten out
as much as I possibly can.
Gluten, sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those were all gut issues for me. But a doctor along the way said, hey, this kind of cancer really likes sugar. So, you might want to minimize your sugar intake.
We talk about that a lot on our show.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I saw that. I saw a couple of episodes.
Yeah.
So, Byron, you work with a lot of couples, and you've also brought up a book, Love and Respect by Dr. Emerson. You love this book, right? And you've got a worksheet that
best marriage book ever written.
Let's talk about that. Because we have a lot of individuals in married couples who watch the show and have benefited from some videos that's been out with previous guests. So we know that the audience is there and they want some of this information to better their marriages. So let's dive into that a little bit and how you can serve your spouse.
If I remember the story correctly, he surveyed people in his church and determined that what women in a marriage want the most is love, and what husbands want the most is respect. And he ended up writing a book based on Ephesians 5:33 that says, husbands, love your wives, wives, respect your husbands. Simple. The whole book is written on that one verse. And if I remember correctly, they took these surveys out and surveyed people outside of the faith, in other cultures, all around the world, different places, and it came with the same results. Women need respect. Women need love, and men respect. And when people start speaking the other's language, and it takes sacrifice, it takes a stretch. You're speaking a foreign language sometimes. It doesn't always occur to us as guys to listen to our wife. It just doesn't always occur to us.
And we joke about it.
And we interrupt them and say, well, if you would just do this, this, and this, then, it wouldn't happen that way. So we fixed it. What we sometimes forget, or what I sometimes forget, is I'm married to a brilliant woman. And she can totally figure it out on her own. She can totally fix it on her own. So at the point when I'm trying to fix something, it's like I'm mansplaining it to her.
Mansplaining.
And so, and that feels unloving to her. And there are many, many things that he talks about and tips that he gives in the book for how to love your wife, and the same thing on how to respect your husband. But back to that concept, everybody's like a fingerprint. Everybody's different. So what might feel like respect to you, I may not care about. It may not matter to me. And so, from the book, Wendy and I developed sheets for each that had all of the things that he talked about as being things that felt loving and things that felt respectful. And I have my people circle those items that are meaningful to them, and I have them come in and explain why it's meaningful. And every single time the other spouse is going, I had no idea.
Wow.
I didn't know
That's
that.
cool.
Wow. So it's a little homework. They take these questions home. They circle what is meaningful to them. You come and you
Really
talk about
simple.
it. Really simple. I had no idea. This is your, love language. And
then we walk through it.
that.
So
It's a good exercise, I think, in general. Right?
It's very simple.
Oh, yeah.
You're like,
Simple,
why can't we understand the simple things? Like we overcomplicate things.
Oh, because we have to. We have to fix it. Right?
Totally.
But I could ask your wife, what is from a physical perspective, what's important to you? What helps you feel loved? And she might say, well, non-sexual touch is really important to me. I need to know that I'm loved for me. And okay, well, then what does that look like? Well, it looks like a back rub, like when we're laying on the couch watching Netflix, if you could rub my feet, that sort of thing. But I could ask your wife, what does non-sexual touch mean to you? Well, I love it when he runs his hands through my hair, or he grabs my ear and does this, or something non-sexual. And that's hard for us guys because almost everything
Yeah.
we can turn into a sexual event.
Is a back rub ever just a back rub?
Right. No. Sure. I'll get it. I'll rub your front too. But it's just, it's one of those things where when I can get couples in a quiet, controlled environment, they can actually hear the other person say, this is what this means to me. And the other person can execute on that. And you just do that for the rest of your life and you're going to be good.
Yeah.
Wow.
But probably once you do it for the first week or two or month, however long that looks like, and you get everybody aligned, it seems like that would be like the way to just fix so many problems.
So many.
Problems that you probably don't even know existed at that point too, you know?
People don't realize, and this was
cool.
an important point in the book, is the authors basically described men and women as being equal in a marriage, but different. You're both where God wants you to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in the Bible that says that you guys are not equal in this.
Mm-hmm.
You're just different and you have different roles.
Yeah. Yeah. Easy as that.
And a lot of people don't feel equal in their marriages. And I think it's an important point to make.
Yeah. Agreed.
Get some counseling. There's hope. I mean, it's a good thing. As you said,
I don't need it, but Brett does.
Well, as you said at the top of the show,
You promised me you wouldn't say that on the air.
it's good to sit down with someone and kind of unpack these things.
Yeah.
And to have somebody, you wouldn't believe how much healing takes place when you have somebody that can bear witness to the events of your life.
Yeah, man. Completely agree. I mean, like I mentioned, like I honestly think just the act of verbalizing it, just putting it out there, just getting things from your stomach or chest out into the world. I think that alone does something.
Right.
I think that's why praying out loud is as amazing as it is because there's something that's actually happening when you're vocalizing all this. It's a lot to take in. It's been an awesome show.
Grateful for the opportunity.
Man, thank you. Yeah.
You guys are doing big work
you.
here.
Well, we're just trying to help plant God seeds.
I think it's important to know what might be a response to PTSD. As we talked about, it's those items where you have a fight, flight, or freeze response, where you're in a constant state of self-blame, or where it takes hours to calm down after an event that really doesn't require that long to recover from. Those types of things. Being on guard all the time. Look for those types of symptoms, and it may be that you do have PTSD, and there's help for that.
What would you say to somebody who is struggling with whether or not they actually have it?
I would say it's not that expensive to go to a counselor and talk it through in one session and determine whether or not you're eligible or need to be tested for PTSD. I mean, it's very simple.
Can you also address that website also? You were talking about earlier.
The website for the discussion of PTSD. Yes, it's called EMDR. Yeah. On this website, this is the national website for EMDR, and they discuss here what PTSD is, and it gives some of the elements associated with it. It talks about how it affects your life, and then ultimately how EMDR can help in a situation when you do have PTSD. It discusses how eye movement desensitization reprocessing works and how it can overcome PTSD. It's a powerful therapy. One thing I didn't mention is that it helps with 95% of people.
Wow.
So
it helps with 95%.
It helps. It's the most effective form of therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the number one form of therapy for PTSD.
Please go and get yourself assessed, because this sounds amazing.
And it's a very simple assessment. It really is.
Too, I think the idea, like we talked about, it's uncomfortable talking about things that maybe either are traumatic or you don't think are traumatic.
Right.
But it is worth sitting with somebody, paying a one-time fee, and vocalizing this stuff. And maybe you will find, kind of like I found, something that I didn't think was something that annoyed me when I was younger, that I didn't think was necessarily a traumatic experience, because I was looking at it through the lens of, I wasn't beaten up. I wasn't sexually assaulted. I didn't have this or that. So it's not a trauma. Those things can still traumatize you.
Yes.
And those things can still have a very negative effect on your psyche, your health, mental health. It is worth sitting with somebody and unpacking things. And you will feel better. I would leave my sessions with this guy and I would feel like a weight was lifted off. And every time that I did this, and I didn't go a ton of times, but every time that I did, I felt better and better and better. And I could think clear. And I felt like I could finally just work through a bunch of things that were really holding me down. So I just, man, I think what you do is so, so important.
Someone with trauma, with PTSD, it is not your fault. You can't bring post-traumatic stress disorder on yourself. It is always at the hands of somebody else or a particular event. It is not something that is our fault. You are not to blame. And that, I think, is deliverance for a lot of people, because self-blame is a cornerstone of PTSD.
And I think that it puts the onus back on them, though, at that point to say, okay, because this random event happened, this tragedy happened, now the onus is on me to do something about it.
Right.
And I think I know that that's the first step in healing.
Wasn't that, though, Evan, a really compassionate thing that you did for yourself?
Yes.
Wasn't that a form of compassion for yourself?
100%. 100%.
And that's the way I address everybody who comes in front of me, is I want to have compassion for them because maybe not everybody else did.
Yeah.
Hey guys, the name of the show is Counter Cause. If something is ailing you, figure out what is causing it and then counter. If you're suffering from what you think could be PTSD or some other form of a mental illness, like Byron said, it's not expensive. Go get yourself assessed. Go talk to a counselor one time. Start the process. Start the healing process. Free yourself.
Yeah.
Byron, thank you for being on the show. It has been an awesome treat. We've enjoyed it. How can people find your practice that's in the local DFW area?
Rockwall Counseling and Wellness. I'm not certain exactly that is the website. So Rockwall Counseling and Wellness. We have offices all over the area here, and we have amazing therapists. And our owner, Lauren Coates, is an awesome woman, and she runs the whole show with respect and compassion. And for people who can't afford counseling, we have some ability to lower our fees and give sliding scale.
Super cool, you guys, man.
Doing God's work.
Super cool.
That's awesome.
It's an amazing place.
Well, guys, the links will be in the description. If you've enjoyed the show, consider liking and subscribing and sharing with others that you think could benefit from the content that we've discussed today. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.